Everyone, it's Alexis with Project Management Made Simple. In this video, I'm going to share some tips for coaching teams through carryover. So let me first define what carryover is. Carryover is, in this context, we're working with the Scrum team and we have a sprint plan. We come to the end of the sprint and there's work that's incomplete that then needs to be carried over into the next sprint or perhaps placed back into the backlog. And so in these situations, pretty much carryover work is work that was not finished for whatever reason. Ideally, throughout the sprint, the team should be highlighting impediments that when you get to this point and when you eventually move into your retrospective, you can assess those impediments, but sometimes that's not always the case. And so in this video, I'm going to give you some tips, some things to consider if you're a Scrum Master and you're coaching your team through how to handle carryover. So my first tip, as I alluded to, is when you're going into retrospective, is to prompt the team to understand what happened that there was carryover. You do want to be careful in these conversations, especially as a Scrum Master, that this becomes more of a conversation piece rather than a way to accuse the team of not performing and not doing their best. The numbers don't lie, the data doesn't lie, there's work that's incomplete, but there can be so many reasons why that was the case. And if we are not careful as Scrum Masters, we become sort of drill sergeants that are just trying to keep the team on plan and can maybe lose sight of the bigger picture. So going into these types of conversations around carryover, you first want to, as a Scrum Master, as the Agile coach, have an understanding, and kind of give your team the benefit of the doubt in terms of the things that may have caused them to have this carryover in the first place. So when you're going into your retrospective, prompting them, having that conversation, and as an input to the retrospective, as I mentioned before, throughout the life cycle of the sprint, when you're conducting your daily scrums or your daily stand-ups, ideally the team will have identified some impediments that you can then bring to the scrum. Now, granted, those impediments ideally should be resolved, right? That's the reason why we talk about impediments. But then also once we get to the retrospective, gathering that information in a way that the team can assess what the patterns are and therefore identify some improvements. Now, another part of this conversation that I'd recommend to you as a Scrum Master, just anyone, trying to assess carryover, is to also coach the team through what qualifies as an impediment. From my experience working with different team members have a different way of understanding what an impediment means. And so impediments can range from a room being too cold, from your internet being too slow. It's not just the obvious ones of I don't have access to a system. I think those ones tend to be ones that across the board team members are quick to call out and identify, but it's really anything that impacts the team's ability to deliver upon the sprint goal. And it could be an even wider conversation around impediments of not just the sprint goal, but the team's ability to deliver, period. But for the context of this video, I'm talking about carryover, so I'm going to look at this through the lens of the sprint goal. And so having that conversation with your team as well in the retrospective to understand, especially if they haven't raised any impediments, of prompting them and understanding what is their understanding of impediments to begin with. Impediments and blockers are sometimes used interchangeably, and I've found that from experience, the word blocker has more of a sort of strict tone around it. When we think of a blocker in any context, we think of it stopping work. And so an impediment really includes blockers, but it being more so anything that slows down the work. It could be things that stop the work, but it's not only things that stop the work. I think another way in which team members sometimes don't raise impediments is because there may not be a quick solution that is identifiable. If I'm, for instance, in a room that's too cold, but the AC is controlled from some central location and it can't be changed for that particular room. If I'm a developer on the team, why would I bring that up to the Scrum Master, right? And so really the conversation around impediments, I think, is something that could be very useful when you're having that conversation with your team around carryover. Again, is what qualifies as an impediment. And so to that point of something like the room being cold, what's the point of bringing that up? Well, you know, it's a case-by-case basis, but I would say that in some of these ways where things may not be as obvious for the resolution, it could inform you when you're going into planning. So for instance, an impediment is that the internet that you're working on, a lot of us are working from home, your internet is too slow. Well, then perhaps that's impacting your ability to deliver and, you know, to work through things as fast as you typically could. And so in that case, we may have to plan a little bit less work, right? And we have that transparent conversation. That's a key pillar in Scrum, is transparency. And so being able to say like, hey, one of our team members, you know, dealing with some challenges with the internet. And so what this means is maybe have to plan a little bit less, or temporarily maybe some other team members step in and take on more work. So even little things like that that may not have a quite obvious solution to them can bring about really informative conversations that help the team to work better and more effectively and efficiently. And just to have, again, going back to that transparency, inspection, and adaptation, keeping all of these things in mind and wanting to have a consistent conversation with the team that allows for us to really go into these different realms and to see how these things are affecting the team. So this was a video where I shared some tips with you as a Scrum Master of how to coach the team through carryover. I hope you found this video helpful. If you do have any questions, feel free to leave those below in the comments, and I will talk to you all in my next video.